to episode 26. This is a very special episode, this one, because unusually it doesn't feature me working on the bus. Yeah, actually it does, but over a period of 6 months. So I'm going to start uniquely in January before I started recording these little clips. And then you'll see the very first clip that I made for my Facebook group. Unfortunately, as is the norm with this, great plans don't always come to fruition. And in that first one, I said, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and this. You may remember I've said this before, and then not a lot gets done. So anyway, sit back and enjoy. We start in January of this year when it was really cold up here. It is now July. The sun is shining. It is beautiful out there. So I'm more than happy to spend all day long up here. But back then it was freezing cold and everything I tried to do was thwarted by the cold. So anyway, let's start in January and we'll work our way all the way through to July. Hopefully it will give you a great impression of the sort of work that has been done over the last 6 months, even if me, being so close to it, doesn't notice.
Okay, so let's get started. I think it's useful to look back to January before I started making these little video clips. And the reason that I started doing them was more for my benefit than anything else. One of the things that I learned back in the sort of the 80s and the 90s was not taking any pictures of the work that we did back then, because they're a very useful memory to show you sort of, you know, progress, as it were. It's also very useful when you start putting the damn thing back together again to have a lot of photographs. So I started taking dozens of photographs, but never really thought about making sort of little videos. So I know other people have been making little videos and, you know, good for them. That's their sort of niche market. I wasn't really too concerned about that. So the little videos I made, as I said just now, were really for my benefit and also for the benefit of my friends on Facebook. But I do accept that my own personal friends, those who are not bus enthusiasts, are not going to necessarily watch these. So I do understand that, and I know that there's a much bigger, wider audience out there of people who are interested in bus restoration and interested in London buses per se. So anyway, should we get started? January was freezing cold. The days are very short, the nights are very long, and it's not much fun when everything you touch is below freezing. So this is a genuine picture, and I know it looks rather funny colour, doesn't it? But it's a genuine picture of my coffee mug, which I'd left with water in it to wash it out before I'd left the previous week. And when I came back on Saturday morning, it had frozen solid, and the kettle had frozen solid, and all the water that I'd taken up there, I'd take up clean water, that all frozen solid too. So you can see the problems that I was about to face doing this bus in January. So this, friends, is the very first clip that I actually made myself. It's myself laying under the bus, obviously, and I am wire brushing bits of the chassis. I was working on the area around the rear wheel arch because we'd found the previous year quite a lot of rot around there. So basically I was tidying it up. Now, as I say, this was the very first clip that I actually made. It's a very, very, very short clip, handheld, with one hand holding the power drill and the other hand holding the camera. And I can't remember what I'd used for light, but I hadn't really thought much about it actually. It ended up the shortest clip ever. So here we go, the very short clip. I told you it was short. Okay, so clambering out from underneath the bus and getting on with some actual real work. Here's the corner panels. You can see quite a pile of junk I've got at the back of the barn there. You can see the corner panels where the adverts are. That's the one in front of us, I think, is the near side, and the other one is the off side that sits just behind it. Then you've got the driver's footwell, and that little square rectangular sort of panel there, that's a battery boost socket. RTs were fitted with battery boost sockets when they were delivered, and not the sort of ones that we get today on modern buses. And I think, frankly, if you tried to apply a battery boost socket to that, like the modern style, I think you'd pull the whole thing out from under the bus. But that one came off a pre-war RT that got scrapped at the dock, so I managed to save it. So I've kept the flap, and I've also got the the little boost socket behind, but it'd be completely useless because nothing will fit into it. So that's the small pile of stuff at the back of the barn. That was before I really got into spraying and painting, and the weather conditions really weren't very good for doing that, and the paint was taking forever to dry. And on a couple of occasions I'd spent hours rubbing a panel down and what have you, and then painted it, and then it would get cold overnight and gets frost damaged. Now, I bought a set of blinds. I had them made thanks to my good friend Roy Makewell, who supplied the original spec for this set of blinds for Chelsham Bus Garage, which is what this RT finished its life at. And I really wanted to get the blinds back in at the end of the previous year in December. Unfortunately, like I said before, it's like peeling an onion. You take something off and you find there's something else you need to do, and then you keep going on and on and on. Eventually, there's probably not a lot left. But anyway, so this is the gully upstairs looking across where the blinds are actually fitted. You can see the floor there, the upper deck floor, which I'd partly done back in the early 90s, but I'm not happy with it. I'm going to do it all again anyway. But so yeah, that's the gully. You can see I've already put the wires in to that little terminal block there. The blind box itself will hinge off of that little rowel just by the edge of the floor there. So yeah, that had to be cleaned up, rubbed down, and several coats of paint applied to it. But that's probably almost finished. I think I had the little rowel to paint because it's a bit thin. You can see the blue or the whatever colour it is just showing through there. So yeah, that needed a little bit of finishing off. But I really was determined to try and get this finished by the end of December. This thing was a bit of a nightmare. It had 3 little light fittings on it and some old wiring, and I really wanted to keep the wiring. I'll use the term loosely, heritage wiring. All the rest of the wiring's being replaced, but in places where I think it'd be nice to leave it in situ, this was one of them. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to play ball. So I'd removed the little sockets that the bulbs sit in. I cleaned up all the terminals. And when I tried to put them back, the old wires were having none of it. They kept snapping, the cloth covering around them broke away. And in the end, the only thing I could do was to strip it all out and rewire it in the same fashion that I've done everything else on the bus. Right, so this picture takes us back a step. This one is before the previous picture, and it shows both that top box in and the bottom box in, but minus the little light fittings for the bulbs. You may not notice, in fact it looks like the wiring, you can see the wiring on the top one is still there, but you can't see the wiring on the bottom one. So I had to, having sprayed and painted and spent hours on that box and everything, I had to take it out and ended up with the whole thing on the bench and rewiring it as you saw before. But nonetheless, it's all part of the fun of doing this. But at least she looks quite nicely wrapped up. I don't think I was at the time. So in this shot, you can see the light fittings are back on. Heritage wiring has been nicely sort of reused on that top box. So that's the number box and the VAR points. You can see massive size those VAR points are compared to a Routemaster. Huge things. But the bottom box, as you notice, has been removed, and that was the shot you saw just before. So I had to stick all that stuff back together again on a bench. It wasn't going to go back in the bus like I hoped. You might recall it was one of my goals to put the blinds back in the bus at the end of December, and that didn't happen. But nonetheless, I thought I would actually record me applying power to the blinds for the first time. So this is a little video clip that wasn't used on my Facebook account, but I did film it, and here it is for your delight. A bit Heath Robinson-ish, but fingers and toes crossed, this might just work. Here we go. So it's for this lot here. Let's see what happens. We get one big bang, we know it's gone wrong. Oh, just one bulb not working. How about that? So, hurrah! Having done that, the advert panels went back on, blinds were fitted, and then I popped in this little panel. We still haven't got to February, guys and girls, but we're going to be there in a second. So, abracadabra, we're now in February. Thank God for that. Anyway, so I spent February rubbing down lots of panels on the bus, and you can see the state I made myself in. This picture was after I tried, full-heartedly it seems, looking back on it, to rub down the little metal panel that sits over the top of the engine. If you ever look upwards, because it's a double-deck bus, there's this sort of canopy that sticks out, and there's a large metal plate there. And the first thing I did was to get the orbital sander on it and start rubbing the thing down. I didn't want to paint strip it because I thought this is going to make an absolute mess. And it was really quite awkward. Pushing this orbital sander upwards for lengthy periods of time meant that, one, I got completely cream crackered, and secondly, I got covered in all this dust. You might notice, although there's a bit of it on my nose, I was actually wearing a mask at the time, but I was pleased I wasn't going home on the train looking like that. Right, so away from me covered in green, here is the very first clip that I made. Morning, it's 7 o'clock in the barn. It is pretty nippy out there actually. It's not as cold as it has been recently, because at least everything here is not frozen. But anyway, today's little project is to try and sort out that corner, that panel there just above my head on the offside of the RT. Had to come off. I wasn't very happy with it. Good friend of mine, Roy Gould, popped in to see me last weekend and said that he didn't think it was sitting right. So I made some small amendments to the wood that sits just below it there, which you can just about see, that fresh wood there. So I made some small amendments to that and I've refitted it. Still not entirely happy with it. But the other bit that's sitting there, that grey panel, just to the side of me, that is the bit that fits. It's the white bit that has the indicator fitted on it. That's what that hole is at the top. So I need to remake the support for the indicator bracket. All of that complete corner, when I took it out years and years ago, was basically matchwood. It just fell out and fell on the floor. But anyway, it's getting a little bit nippy here. So a little ride around the barn. As you can see, just over the other side there, walking backwards, I'm not very good at that, is the canopy piece which came out of the RT. And just behind me here is where it should go, that bit just above my head. Now, I've got a little bit of wiring still to do up there. As you can see, there's a bit of cabling. Yesterday, I sprayed some green in that corner. You can see that just above my head there. So I've sprayed all of that with just a very light coat of green. Problem is, because of the cold weather, the paint is not going off properly. So I put a very, very thin coat on there, and the idea being is that when it eventually gets resprayed, there'll be no little gaps or anything like that. But anyway, it's starting to get light out there, as you can see by the light just coming through the roof panel just above my head. Let's just go for a little further walk, and we can see that outside it's starting to look quite pretty, quite honestly. Hang on a minute, let's just go out of this door. I learned how to turn the camera around as well, couldn't I? There we go. So that is the S6 morning. Look at that. Right, there you go. So anyway, at least it's not freezing out there. That's one godsend. Right, so to get on with this then, speak to you later. Bye. Morning, it's Sunday morning, the 4th of February. I'm in the barn again with the RT, as you can see. Yesterday wasn't quite as fruitful as I'd planned it to be. I posted a couple of videos yesterday evening about my plans for Saturday. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go according to plan. A late friend of mine called Steve Simmons used to use the word diaster, and I think it was a bit of a diaster yesterday. I had planned, if you may have recalled, I mentioned lists, where I have a list of things I want to do, and those things have to get done in order for the next batch of stuff to get done. And it doesn't ever go according to plan. Sometimes I'm a bit over optimistic about the bits I need to do or the bits I've got to get cleared. So the two plans yesterday were to sort out the frost damaged panels that I'd sprayed 2 weeks ago and the cold had got to them, and obviously with a much nicer temperature now, I thought, right, okay, this is a good time to do it. So before I met with Norman, I prepped up my panels, rubbed them down, washed them over, and meanwhile I got on putting some beading up on the other side of this. That's where the problem came. I mean, quite frankly, what's the problem with putting some beading on a bus? Two things. One, RTs are twisty-turny things. They like their sort of, I don't know what you might want to call it, but the soft edges. But the beading on the front corner, not only does it turn a corner, but it also twists. That was the problem. So I made up all this lovely beading for this side and the other side, and where it twists, it really needs to be done on the bench before I've drilled all the holes in it, because once you drill a hole in it, it weakens the beading, and then it turns to sort of, it bulges where the hole is that you've drilled for the screws. So I've got to do that all again. So that's today's bit of fun. The bit of beading I put on there I've got to take off. The other problem with the paint was cross-contamination. On the beading, behind the beading, you put a silicone, which stops the rainwater getting into the frame of the bus. Unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job with these. But nonetheless, today's mastic includes silicone. And silicone and paint are not good bedfellows, certainly drying paint. What happened, unfortunately, was I moved the panel, having washed it and cleaned it and rubbed it down, the big panel that sits just up there, and my fingers, my gloves had some of the silicone on them, and despite the fact that they were clean gloves, I think I picked up some power tools and moved them over, and of course the contamination from the power tools got onto the gloves, and that's then got onto the panel, and now that's gone bleh. So anyway, so that's got to be done again. That won't happen today because frankly I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to try and get on with remaking the beading. So today's task is to take off the bit of beading I put on there yesterday, which I'm not happy with. I'll put a picture on up online later on, and you tell me if you think it's right or wrong, but I'm just not happy with it, so take it off. And then I'm going to have to set the drill up again to remake all the bits of beadings that I need for this side and the other side. So that's going to be my task today, which really in essence is doing what I did 3 or 4 weeks ago and having to do the whole damn thing again. But that's what it's like owning an RT. If you want an RT, don't expect to get it done quickly, because it ain't going to get done quickly. So anyway, I'm going to push on. So thank you very much for viewing this. If you got this far, Christ, you've got nothing better to do. But anyway, have a good day, and I'll bring you some more updates as we progress later on this month. Cheers, bye. Right, so there you are. They were the very first 2 clips that I made for my friends on my Facebook group, my sort of personal friends, as it were, and didn't really get many views. I think people just looked at it and thought, oh, okay, we're not going to watch that. So I probably had about 5 people who actually watched it. But obviously, you know, this now is a much bigger audience, and thanks very much for sort of tuning in, or whatever they say in YouTube land. So they were the very first 2 that I did. No microphone, used the iPhone own microphone. That banging and rattling you hear in the background, unfortunately, is the wind, which causes the shed to make all sorts of odd noises while you're up there. So that's why the sound quality was pants. But there you go, that was the very first 2 that I made. This is the panel that I mentioned in that clip that sat above the engine. As you can see, I've sprayed it. Actually, I tell you what, that, as you can see, I keep saying that all the time. As is visible, perhaps that's better, isn't it? As is visible in this picture, you can see that panel. What you can't see, and I'm trying to look at it very carefully myself actually, is where it got frost damage. You can see just around towards the top corner right hand side, you notice that, I'm trying to avoid, you can see, there is a little bit of frost damage on that panel, and it meant I had to rub the whole thing down again. It's one of the problems with it being extremely cold up there. I'd sprayed the panel sort of, I think, first thing in the morning on a Saturday, and then left it, and then by Sunday, obviously over Sunday night to Saturday night, Sunday morning, it went down well below freezing. And when I came in the morning, it was like, oh, got to do it all again. But and I had to leave it as well. I think I had to leave that for about 2 weeks before it's sufficiently hardened off for me to rub the thing down and then spray it over. And I'm very grateful to my friend Mark Davis, who came and helped me put the panel back. And I'll be honest with you, I couldn't work out when we were trying to put it back which way round it was. It's so simple, and I got all confused. It's on a bit of a video. I've got a video of it. I won't bore you with it now, but there is a bit, a video clip of me trying to put it back in the wrong place and trying to work out, well, why is that there and that bit's there? But it's upside down. As you look in it now, it's upside down. And I was thinking of it being the other way around, but don't worry, silly things you do. So March started with a great rub down. The panels that I put on I rubbed down, and then I started to remove the paint from around the windows using a combination of rubbing down and paint stripper. So I used quite a bit of paint stripper. Paint stripper is quite good stuff. As I say, you know it was cold. I can't labour on that too much, maybe I should. But what I was doing was putting the paint stripper on and then just leaving it overnight. And that's one really good thing you can't do in the summer, because it dries out. In the summer, it's so warm in there. The higher up you go, if you go up on the upper deck of the bus, or worse, the roof, when it's been warm the last couple of days in July, as I'm filming this or making this, the higher you go in the barn, the hotter it gets. So if you're using paint stripper up there, you'd apply it and then it would just dry out really too quickly. So bearing in mind, because it was pretty much hovering around freezing back in February and March, it's really ideal for paint stripping. Right, so having taken the beading off the other side, it's not reusable, and I had this made several years ago. I had to get a minimum order quantity, I think it was for about 5 RTs, so I've got a lot of this spare, so if I make a mistake I can go back and do it again, so I don't get too panicky if it goes wrong. So what I've done is I've made up a little rig, and here you can see me making up the new bits of beading, although for that corner piece it wasn't a very clever idea. Right, so that's said corner piece. You could just about see that the top of the beading lurches away from the window pan there, and the bottom is tight. So the lesson I learned, and actually thanks to someone who's done it before, said don't do it on the bus, try and do it on the bench. So I've made up all that really nice beading, drilled all the holes in it so that each one was at the perfect length between each other, as it were, and disaster. So that bit of beading unfortunately had to go in the skip. Not very far from me is the Heath Robinson Museum, because Heath Robinson was a Harrow resident as well as me. Anyway, this is my Heath Robinson way of making sure that the beading actually goes in the right place. So what I've done is I've got a bit of string and I've attached it onto one end of the beading and then pulled it tight so it will sit in the right place. So now that beading I know is spot on. And I did it because when you're on your own, and the beading's probably about 9 foot long, 10 foot long possibly. So what tends to happen is you start at one end, and then as you work your way along, it starts to droop down the side of the bus. So this is my Heath Robinson way number 1 of being the second person to assist you. So that's what I've done. So that's basically making sure it's in line, and also at the same time indicating that yeah, I've got it right. I'll tell you what, hold on, before I come away from that, do you see that little mark there on the panel? That is a deliberate mark that I put on to indicate where the original beading finished and the new section began. The sections I've got are slightly different lengths, so therefore the joins will be in a different place. But I made copious notes so that should I try to replicate it, or if there's a problem, I can at least identify where the original beading finished and you know, where the new bit of beading will start from. So that's what those little marks are for. That's the front of the RT before I vandalised it. Started to restore it. I had feared that some of the wood behind was going to be quite rotten. In fact, they normally are all around that area. The headlamps around that little grille and the lamp and everything is really quite bad. But the only piece that was rotted is this piece up in the corner here. But unfortunately, as that pillar runs all the way down to the mudguard and sits just above the wheel there, it meant that it had to come out. So all the front of that bus, all those bits and pieces you see there, have got to be removed. The other good thing is, my brother, who is a carpenter by trade, he had a look at that piece of wood and he said to me, he said, that is a really intricate piece of craftsmanship. It really is, and thankfully I've managed to get hold of a replacement for that pillar, because making it would have been an absolute nightmare. And as I mentioned in my sort of previous month, as it were, on here, I think January, when I took the wood out at the top of the cab, it just fell on the floor as a pile of matchsticks. So there really isn't much you can copy. But thankfully, I had one of these in, I won't say brand new, because it's not brand new, but it's not been on a bus, if you see what I mean. So its first opportunity to go on a bus was here. So before I took this panel off, I knew it was going to be a nightmare to try and do this on the bench. So the bits that were going to be difficult were the corners. So as you can see in this picture, I keep using that as you can see again. Sorry about that, it's going to start grating. Maybe you should do 5-bar gate and see how many times I've done it. But as is visible in this picture, I've rubbed the corner down. That was going to be the hardest bit to try and do on a bench. And you know, I mentioned my brother. Here he is, vandalising, restoring my bus. So thanks to Daryl for coming down in the freezing cold conditions and having a go at doing that. What he's doing here is just removing this half round beading. That's going to be fun because I haven't got any of that. And apparently you can't get it. You can get bigger or smaller stuff, but not the original stuff. And that stuff is all twisted and burred up. It's not very nice, actually. But so that's going to be replaced. Okay, so we enter April. The days are getting longer, the nights are getting shorter. But April is known for one thing: rain. And it rained and it rained. In fact, do you know what? It's still raining here into July. It's not much of a summer we've had. So, and rain is bad for painting, because what happens is the barn gets very damp inside. There's no water ingress into it, but it's the humidity. And you can go in the morning and you can actually sort of run your hand over the windows on the buses in there and you can see the amount of condensation that comes off. So only a fool would try to paint when it's that damp. So I'm not going to do any painting in this damp. So these bits are going to have to wait for a dry day. Here is that corner panel that you saw earlier on, and it is now pretty much rubbed right down. I haven't used paint stripper on it, I've just rubbed the paint off of it. There's the lamp fittings laying on the floor there. There's the wing. That came out really nice in the end, actually. I was quite pleased with that. And then there's that little piece that sits above the driver's cab window, and the beading that I mentioned a bit earlier on laying on the floor. These are all the bits that I removed from the cab. Yeah, I mean, it's quite a lot of it. It's all different colours. Each bit has to be rubbed down and tidied up. I was quite pleased as the month started to progress. When I laid all this stuff out, it actually looked really quite pretty. Here on the floor, it doesn't look so pretty. You can also notice that I've got little labels on some of that equipment, which basically tells me which wire went in there. Now, I think that says 1, 2, 3, rather simply. That square silver box, that's the interrupter unit for the indicators. And then that little black box alongside it, that's the buzzer unit. Look, I told you, it starts to look really pretty once you put some paint on it. From the bottom, I'm trying to remember what that is, that big brown panel. Answers on a postcard. Then you've got the upper part of the driver's windscreen, because the interior is black and the exterior has to be that nice light green. Then you've got various components from the cab. That's the step that as you step into the cab up the top. There's the little ventilator there on that shelf as well. Just above it is the slipboard holder that would have, you know, to and from, I don't know, Croydon town centre or something on it. These little yellow slips that London Transport loved in the 1960s. And then you've got some other bits and pieces there as you go up the top of the ladders. I did run out of space to allow things to dry because I had so many bits I'd sprayed up and painted. You can just about see the driver's cab door languishing there. More of that in a minute. So there we are. There's the driver's cab door, all neglected at the back of the barn, covered in dust. This is the problem with that barn. A lot of it just sort of floats in from outside. That's probably 25 years worth of dust. So you're looking, obviously, it's upside down with the top of the door on the floor and the door runner, and that's the driver's view of it. I did quite a lot of work on this and I was quite pleased with the end result, and I'll run you through it now. So the first thing I needed to do was take all the paint off both sides. This is like a double skin, so I was able to remove most of the paint using the orbital sander without actually having to resort to paint stripper. So here it is, resting up against a number of other panels before I put some paint on them. That brass, I'll tell you what, there's beautiful brass on an RT. That window frame, it's such a shame that you've got to paint them. The large panel there is just behind the door. That's the driver's emergency cab window that sits just sort of above the engine and down to his or her left-hand side. And then the thing that looks like a suit of armours, you know, whatever, that's the wing. So, and the door propped up on the floor, right way up this time, all nice and clean and all ready to receive paint. Right, and on we go with the various levels of paint. That's the grey primer, and then we put some black on the other side, and then we spray the green. And once the green and the various sort of base colours are on, we can then start reassembling it. So here's a bit of glass ready to go back in. And here it is now, propped up against the shed door, and the opposite side. So it's looking really tidy by the end of the month. Okay, we've only got 3 months to go, so if you want to go away and put the kettle on and put me on pause, please do. So anyway, here we are at the beginning of May. May is the beginning of stripping out the cab and starting to look at the wiring, and I had to survey all the wiring in the cab. I won't bore you with all of that because I went on forever with the damn stuff, and it's not one of my most enjoyable parts of doing this bus, but it's a joy. If you can call it that, has to be done. One day I'm going to tell a story about this. This is the air intake for the compressor that sort of runs the air for the gearbox. That's all it does actually. It's unlike on a modern bus where it powers the suspension and all the other bits and pieces on the bus, like the doors and so on and so forth. This just provides air for the gearbox. That's all it does. So there's a little compressor just down underneath the saloon floor, and this is the intake in the driver's cab. How weird. So yeah, so there we are. That had to be tidied up as well, so that was pulled out. You can also, if just below it, this rather scrappy rubber matting. The floor, as I mentioned in my previous ones, the RT, move around, so they have this like gasket that runs along the side to allow for movement, and this was in quite a deteriorated state, so I've had to take that out as well. But you know, she's getting, by the end of July, it's starting to look quite tidy. But this was a little job that I had to do, and this is quite pretty now, and hopefully we'll get a picture as we get towards July. Right, this caused me a load of angst. This was the cab ceiling. I rubbed it down, as is visible in this picture, but it was actually dead matte, and I got some semi matte, which had used on Route Masters, and sprayed it all over, and God, it looked horrible. In this picture, it's visible the how I'd rubbed it down, and I'd obviously, before I put paint on it, I had to sort of wash off any residue. But this is quite a horrible job to do, actually, I must admit. It's not pleasant. There's too many nooks and crannies, and I've removed so much from that area. The bell mechanism's missing, the panels are missing, all the conduits out. But that stuff that's hanging off the front blind box and sort of the right of picture, a lot of that is going to be very difficult to remove, so I had to stay in there, although personally I'd really rather have removed it all, but it was going to be too difficult to do that. So all of that stuff had to stay there, and I had to sort of rub around it, so it wasn't nice. But yeah, this caused me a lot of angst. So you need to do something that cheers you up when you're doing lots of rubbing down. Here, this lot cheered me up. This was quite pretty, laying it out on the bench, all nicely sort of resprayed and everything. So I won't go through all the components because I did that before, but yeah, I was quite pleased with that. Right, so as you may notice, this is the first coat that I put on the ceiling. And as soon as I put that semi-matte on there, all these bumps and lumps appeared, which were not visible when I was rubbing the ceiling down, and it looks like someone's been hammering on the roof with a T-key. I've noticed actually on my root masters I've got the same problem as well. So the first thing I did is to start filling it. Matte paint, actual dead matte, hides everything. You would never notice it. But I thought in my infinite wisdom that was the paint I was going to use. It looks absolutely beautiful actually. It looks really nice, but it didn't help in the end, so I had to end up using a dead matte. So we enter June. It's summertime. It's nice and warm. The days are long, the nights are short. Beautiful. But we've still got a lot to do. So let's crack on with the wiring. So for some reason, I found myself laying underneath the RT with the gearbox just above my head. That's because the wiring that was, I thought, going to be really simple, turned out to be an absolute nightmare, and it took probably about a weekend and a half maybe to put right. So just from the gearbox to the cab are two little innocent wires. They start at the gearbox and they Miranda their way around the bus until eventually they get to the driver's speedo. It's a completely sort of closed loop system where there's a little dynamo on the side of the box that generates power, and it makes its way up to the cab, and it goes through quite a nice large piece of conduit. Unfortunately, that was going to turn out to be a complete and utter nightmare. Okay, this is a nicer job that you don't have to do laying underneath the bus. I'd planned to rewire this panel on the bench, and that's exactly what I did, and I think that was a project that went really well. This thing was quite manky and horrible. I took it all apart, cleaned up the contacts, cleaned up all the switches. To the left hand side of shot is the starter sort of pull switch, which actually wasn't working, funnily enough. And then you've got the various switches for the headlights, the fog, the wiper, yeah, basically all the other switches are on there. And then you've got all the fuses for all the various bits and pieces at the front end of the bus. And those black wires are, as you can tell, probably if you're electrically minded, they're all black. They're all the negatives going back into the negative block, which is a sort of like a bus bar for returning the power back towards the back of the bus. So that's what they are. So there we are. So that was a nice little job, that one. I enjoyed doing that. So to assist me, I made up this diagram, which you can just see in the back of shot there. This is a life-size diagram using the conduit that I'd taken off of the bus, laid onto that piece of masking paper, so that each time that I cut a wire, I knew it was done to the right length. Also, just visible are numbers, and those numbers relate to the wiring that I put in the wiring diagram, and those that are sort of in that sort of circular bun that you can see just to sort of towards the top of the shot there, they're cables that are already coming into the cab that I'd done. They're the ones that came through the blind box, so I'd marked that they're done and they're ready, and they're just waiting to be pulled through the conduit. So that was that tiny little project. Right, that's genuine RT wire. At the bottom there's cloth coloured wire, and the top is the wire that came out from the indicators. Because don't forget, the indicators on an RT were a later modification, so they run them in PVC wire. How nice of them. But the original wiring, this is 70 years old, is that cloth covered wire at the bottom. So maybe I should stick it on eBay. Original RT wiring. You know somebody would buy it, don't you? Look, I'm not going to dwell on this. This was that horrible wire that ran under the bus. There's a whole episode on this damn wire. And I had to eventually to cut the conduit out, make a new piece of conduit, put new saddles in to hold the thing in place. But so that's not dwell. Let's move on. Right, so at the very end of June, what is visible in this shot is the switchgear panel put back in, the conduit has already gone back in, and then that ceiling. Notice that ceiling? It's too shiny, so that had to be done. I've ended up matte painting that now, so that looks a bit better. It's at the end of July, it's still covered in paper, so I haven't had a chance yet to take the paper down to have a good look. But that paper that's visible in shot just behind, that's just to protect so that any stray paint when I'm spraying in the cab doesn't end up all over the work that I've done previously. So yeah, so the roof is now covered in the cab and you can't see that. So I'm hoping that when I take the paper off, it'll look a lot tidier. Okay, at long last we get to July. That's 6 months of these little videos, episodes number 1 to episode number 25. This is episode 26, which is the summary of all the things that I've been doing with this bus for the last 6 months. So here we are, July. Lovely summer weather, apart from the constant rain and apart from all the other things that go wrong in July. But here we are in July and we can see some really good marked progress. Right, so this is my current project, the floor of the RT and the side walls. At the end of this month I did manage to paint that, pictures coming up in a minute, but the rubber stripping has been taken out, as is visible in this shot. Remember, you probably saw earlier on where you got the air intake and you had all that scruffy rubber there. Thankfully, a good friend of mine actually had these, the original rubber. So they're parked, to use that term, side by side with the ones that came out. The ends, especially towards the front, had really frayed badly, and it looked like I think someone had done some, probably used heat or something to remove something from under the bus. So the one on one side was all frazzled. So I put some paint on the floor on this side. This is the cab handbrake handle you can see there. The bracket's missing and all the other bits and pieces. The cab heater is yet to go in. So most of that actually is going to be covered because you've got the little turret that comes out where all that bumpy floor is. And then the cab door sits in that runner just at the centre of shot there. So a lot of that will be covered, really. It's a bit of a shame. But that's that bit done. And I was a bit wary when I finished on last Sunday to clamber in the cab because I know I'd scratch it all up. So I'm going to have to leave that to harden off for the next couple of days. So right, let me leave you with a picture of optimism. This is the picture of the bus in July 24, and if I showed you a picture of the bus in July 23, it don't look much different. And I came up to the barn at the beginning of 23 to clear up because there was a lot of soot and rubbish in there. I know it looks bad in this shot, but it was really bad. You couldn't get to the RT. There was old engines and just about everything was piled up in there. So anyway, I had planned that entire side, to take it out over the August last year's school holiday because there's 6 weeks of it, and I plan to pop up, maybe spend a couple of weeks in the barn, rip all that out and get it done. It's optimism, isn't it? So in the next 6 months I do hope that I'm going to be able to tackle this side of the bus, and the area round the cab should hopefully be finished by the end of this month. I do hope so. I'll start putting that back in at least early August. I hope to get all the panels back on there. Optimism, don't hold me to it. And then once that's done, I'm then going to do the bonnet area and the front wing and get them sorted out. You notice that front wing seems to sort of peak upwards a little bit. It's certainly out of alignment, and that needs to be sorted out as well. And the other thing on there, the bonnet has been chiselling away over the years at the radiator, and I don't think, my good friend Roy Gould had a look at it, and I don't think we're going to be able to do much about that. And I'll show you some pictures. I haven't photographed it, but I'll show you some pictures as we progress through the next few months. Right, so I shall leave you with this. The last tax disc that the bus carried when it was in service in it came out actually in 1979, but that's the last tax disc that the bus carried, purchased by London Country Bus Services. And also visible at the bottom is the PSV O licence. And do you know what, compared to modern technology, someone must have hated having to write out all of that information. It's the entire address of the company, the vehicle registration, the expiry date, the chassis number, the number of passengers. Wow, what a task. So yeah, it still goes on to this day. So there we are, tax disc and O license, flashback to the 1980s. So thanks very much for watching this, and do you know what, we've been going for almost an hour, well not quite, but thank you very much for viewing this. I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to doing some more of these, hopefully not as long, in the future. So thanks very much everyone, and have a safe day.